Hello, welcome to Lyric Bites episode 4, where we are just breaking down my new song, Show Up, lyric by lyric, to get curious about our stories through a reflection and through a practice. In episode 1, we engaged in what is called breath prayer in order to ask the question, what story is my body or my breath telling? In episode 2, we practiced centering prayer to ask the question, what story are my mind or my thoughts telling? And in episode 3, we used the feeling wheel and welcoming prayer to ask the question, what story are my emotions or feelings telling?
I don't want to leave here the same way that I came, empty-handed, abandoned, ashamed. I need to be certain that all this searching is worth it because it leads to you. A heart of division and a hand-me-down religion just ain't enough. Lord, I need you. I need you to show up.
A heart of division and a hand-me-down religion just ain't enough. Lord, I need you to show up. Today we get to ask the question, what story is my heart telling? What story are my deepest longings and desires telling? Now, I started playing music in the 5th grade. I played the viola all the way through 12th grade. That's the one between the cello and the violin. The cello was beautiful sounding, but too heavy to lug around. And the violin, well, little 5th graders learning how to play it were screechy and sounded awful. So I said, I'll take that one right in between. And after I graduated high school, I began learning how to play guitar and piano and started writing my own songs. And unfortunately, throughout my journey, one of the ways that I tried to run from my own pain was through using music to try to feel like I was somebody. And I remember, of course, it never really did, right? It doesn't work that way. But I remember always feeling like, man, I will be somebody when I get a record deal, or when I'm on a major tour, or when I win an ACM award. When the world recognizes me, then I'll be somebody, and I will feel whole. And for years, I believed this lie. I believed the lie that I wasn't good enough. I believed the lie that God wasn't good enough to make me good enough, and that the world had what I needed to be good enough. And I was in my early 20s when I had an encounter with God, and he started to show me the truth about my search for significance. And I gave my life to him, but over the years I've come to realize that it started out more as an intellectual and verbal faith. And so I believed all the right things, right? And I said and started to do all the right things. But for years, it felt like something was missing in my relationship with God. And though I did all the right things to check the Christian boxes off, I went to church, I served, I did Bible studies, I went to small group, I read Christian books, I led worship at church, on and on and on and on. Yet I was still frustrated. I was confused. I didn't even feel like I knew how to hear from God for myself. And I was easily irritated. I was quick to voice my often very abrasive opinions. And if I was willing to be honest with myself, I would have to admit that I was mostly self-reliant and very proudly independent, the American way, right? But a few years ago, I read a book called Eternal Current by Aaron Nyquist, and he described my exact experience. As a fellow worship leader, he wrote that how dissatisfied he began to become with the whole Sunday morning experience of playing 3 rock songs and a hymn and slapping the label worship on it, and then being talked at for 40 minutes, and then rushing out to beat the Baptist to the buffet. Okay. Nicole paraphrased version. He said it much more eloquently in the book. And for the record, I have no problem with Baptists or buffets. But while the Western Church has a lot to offer, like potlucks, let's be real, I found myself beginning to wonder, actually, how we fell into this sermon-centric model that for the most part only engages us intellectually and academically. It's heavy on words, but very light on actual engagement with each other or God, and even starving for an actual encounter with God for ourselves. And here's the deal. While information, entertainment, inspiration are all fine and dandy, I have found that real transformation comes from a more full-bodied engagement between God's Spirit and ours. The mind, yes, but also the body and the heart and the emotions as well. And like we talked about in the last episode, we often push down any negative feelings that we have by staying busy, by overanalyzing in our heads. That is definitely a go-to for me, by distracting ourselves in a million different ways. And we definitely don't want to be seen as needy or overly emotional or weak, right? It's not the American way. We likely learned early in life that it's not safe to be vulnerable, or that our authentic selves just aren't welcome. And we then decide naturally to put on a mask. You know, the masks we talked about in the last video. If you haven't seen that one, I'll put a link below so you can go check that out. But by denying the feelings that God is actually trying to speak to us through, the emotions that God put in us to communicate with us, by denying those, we actually stay stuck. And I've often found the old adage, God can't heal what I won't feel, to be true. Now, not because he can't, right? He's God. But he asks for our engagement in our healing process. And he doesn't force anything upon us, even if it would be better for us. But it's the same with desire. God gave us a wide range of emotions. And he uses these and he speaks through them. He also gave us desires to help guide us. And unfortunately, in many Christian circles, it's a lot like emotions. It's kind of the dirty D word. And if our hearts are wickedly deceitful, then we must cast suspicion on any desires within us, right? But I was just talking to a friend of mine the other day, and I was describing how I have felt such a desire to use music as a means to teach and to guide people to worship God through more than just singing. But I felt like I needed a way for my old desire of using music as a means to feel significant and whole and healed. I needed a way to put that to death. And she wisely reminded me that we can't make anything die. So major point, that anything that happens in this spiritual journey is God's doing. And all we can do is show up and make ourselves available to him, the one who is the healer. And she said that, she reminded me that a lot of addiction is actually born out of killing desire and out of managing desire. And that there's a better way to live with this experience of my mind and my body and my emotions. We know that those physical body sensations, you know, aches and pains of all kinds, my mind with all its doubts and busy and frenzied thinking, my emotions like my anxiety and my fears, there's a better way to live with those, just like there's a better way to live with my heart's deepest longings and desires too. And so the way that we do this is not by trying to kill what we deem bad, or to numb it or hide it or run from it, but by beginning to listen to it in the presence of God. So what story is your heart or spiritual awareness telling? What are your heart's deepest longings and desires? Maybe it's for just one more day with a loved one who's passed on. Maybe it's the fruition of long-awaited hopes and dreams. Maybe your heart grieves the disconnect between having been made in the image of a perfect God, but living in a broken world. Yearning for Eden, where all is right in the world, but waking up in an all is definitely not well with the world news cycle. God put desires in our hearts to steer us, but it's also important to note that not all desires are equal, not all desires are God-given, and not all desires are healthy. So it is vitally important that we bring our hearts to God and place our desire before Him so He can either fulfill it or change it. In order to help us begin to listen and notice what God might be wanting to say to us through desire and grief, hope and disillusionment, we will engage in a practice called lament. Lament is a surfacing of desire and honesty. Lament requires us to be honest, and if we don't, we get stuck. If you're stuck, there's usually a lack of clarity around desire. Lament is called a practice because it's not just about dealing with grief when something catastrophic happens. Sometimes it's just a naming of what's wrong. It's just agreeing with God that the world is broken. We're not blaming, complaining, or minimizing. We're simply showing up in the presence of God with our whole selves, admitting that He is God and we are not, and asking God to show up in our lives. Today, we're going to use a prayer guide based on Psalm 3 that I got from a friend, Judy Lewis, which she got from a website called Soul Shepherding. I mention both because they are both great resources for getting still with God. I will link both of them in the description below. I will also have a download of this guide on my website where this video is embedded, which is provided for free by soulshepherding.com, in case you would like to print it out and easily follow along. We will ask some questions using Psalm 3 as a guide, and you can either write your responses out in the spaces provided on the worksheet, or you can write them in a journal or plain piece of paper, or you can simply answer them in the stillness of your own mind and heart. We will begin our practice by getting still and becoming centered on our Father by paying attention to our breath. I invite you now to breathe in deeply and to breathe out. Inhale and exhale. Continue breathing as you sink into this present moment. And I invite you to be aware of your body in the chair. Aware of your back and legs being held up and supported by the chair. With each breath, just scanning from head to toe and releasing any tension in your forehead, your eyes, your ears, jaw, neck and throat, shoulders, chest, arms, releasing any tension in your hips, legs, down through your knees, ankles, and finally feeling your feet flat on the floor. It is best to sit in an upright and alert position, as our bodies are not accustomed to being still without sleep. Your goal is to remain alert, yet relaxed for the duration of this prayer. Breathe deeply for a few more seconds as we slow down to get still with God. I'm going to begin by reading Psalm 3. I will read the entire psalm, just let it wash over you. And then we will go back and we will pray through it piece by piece to give our whole selves to God. Psalm 3, a psalm of David, when he fled from his son Absalom. O Lord, how many are my foes? How many rise up against me? Many are saying of me, God will not deliver him. Selah. But you, O Lord, are a shield around me, my glory, and the one who lifts my head up high. I cry out loud to the Lord, and he answers me from his holy mountain. Selah. I lie down and sleep. I wake up again, because the Lord sustains me. I will not fear the tens of thousands drawn up against me on every side. Arise, O Lord, deliver me, O my God. Strike all my enemies on the jaw. Break the teeth of the wicked. From the Lord comes my deliverance. May your blessing be on your people. Selah. We will now use Psalm 3 as a template to journal or to pray quietly. It begins a psalm of David, so go ahead and make this your own personalized psalm. Either in your head or down on paper, write out a psalm of, and put your name. I would write a psalm of Nicole. And then finish the sentence, when I. Identify a situation in your life that is troubling you. I will give you space to do a little bit of these, but also feel free to pause the video if you'd like more time on any of these prayer points. The next line says, O Lord, how many are my foes? Now describe your struggle or conflict. Next it says, many are saying of me. Now describe the criticisms that other people, Satan, or your own internal critic are judging you with. But you, O Lord, are a shield around me, my glory and the one who lifts my head high. Picture the Spirit of Christ surrounding you to protect you. What do you see? Verse 4, I cry out loud to the Lord, and he answers me. Give thanks to God for the good and redemptive things he's doing. Verse 5, I lie down and sleep, I will not fear. Pray to trust God for peace and protection. Verse 7, Arise, O Lord, strike all my enemies. Tell God, the righteous judge and your deliverer, your feelings of anger or hurt and what you want him to do. And verse 8, From the Lord comes deliverance. May your blessing be upon. Ask for God's blessing for you, loved ones, and even the people troubling you. Now feel free to go back to the top and to go through this practice more slowly, or to engage in this practice tomorrow, next week, next month, as a way of continually bringing your heart to God, the good and the bad and the ugly. Have a blessed day.